It was a morning like any other in Maplewood, New York. The town was just beginning to stir under the gentle light of dawn, a time when most locals made their way to the diner or the coffee shop to kickstart their day. Maplewood was the sort of town where people prided themselves on knowing their neighbors, their vehicles, and even their daily routines. Officer Bill Harris, a seasoned figure of authority here, had come to consider himself the silent guardian of this place. His patrol routes were second nature. He knew every driveway, every shop, every face. As he steered his cruiser down the town's narrow, familiar streets, his gaze landed on something out of place: a sleek, polished black sedan parked outside a convenience store. In Maplewood, most residents drove older trucks, dented vans, or well-worn sedans that had seen better days. A car like this was like a neon sign blinking against the earthy, small-town backdrop. Intrigued, Harris slowed his cruiser, squinting into the reflection off the sedan's tinted windows. Inside, he glimpsed a woman sitting alone in the driver's seat. She was a black woman, her posture upright, dressed in a neat, tailored suit, a stark contrast to the casual, unassuming Maplewood attire. Harris's curiosity was soon overshadowed by suspicion. He couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong, that her presence here was an anomaly, a ripple in the smooth fabric of Maplewood's predictability. In his mind, people didn't just sit alone in cars here without reason, especially not strangers. She must be up to something, he thought. Pulling his cruiser over a few yards away, he decided to watch. His eyes stayed fixed on her through his rearview mirror, a palpable tension beginning to simmer within him. This wasn't just curiosity, it was the instinct of a man who believed he was responsible for keeping Maplewood untouched, unaltered, and safe. And this polished, unmarked vehicle, with its unrecognizable occupant, felt like an unwelcome change. Satisfied that he had observed enough, Harris picked up his radio and called dispatch, keeping his voice casual but with an edge of implied urgency. Unit 4, this is Officer Harris. I'm checking on a suspicious vehicle outside Sam's Market on Oak Street. No plates visible from my angle, possible unregistered vehicle. I'll be making contact shortly. Over. The dispatcher confirmed, but Harris's thoughts were already racing, fueled by a preconception that something illegal was unfolding before him. How often did strangers, especially someone as sharply dressed and composed as this woman, show up in Maplewood, and what legitimate reason could she possibly have to just sit there? Exiting his cruiser, Harris adjusted his belt, ensuring that his badge was visible, his posture projecting authority. Approaching the sedan, he knocked on the window with a sharp rap, sending a clear message he wasn't here for a friendly chat. The woman inside lowered her window slowly, and her calm gaze met his. "Good morning, ma'am," he began, his tone firm, edged with suspicion. "Mind telling me what you're doing here?" The woman's eyes remained steady, her expression unreadable. "Good morning, officer," she replied evenly. "I'm just here for work." "Work," he repeated, frowning. "What kind of work brings you out here, ma'am?" She didn't flinch. Her voice was even, unbothered by his tone. "I'm with the government," she said simply. "On official duty." Something tightened in Harris's chest. The government, huh? And what department might that be? His tone was skeptical, laced with a subtle challenge. The woman met his gaze with unwavering calm. CIA. The answer left him momentarily stunned. He hadn't anticipated this, hadn't expected such composure, such confidence. Harris's eyes narrowed, his skepticism deepening. CIA, he echoed, incredulity tainting his words. "Mind if I see some ID, ma'am?" The woman nodded, unruffled. "Of course. May I reach into my bag?" He hesitated, his hand instinctively moving closer to his holster. "Go ahead," he said, his voice clipped, watching her every move. She reached into the passenger seat with measured, unthreatening motions, retrieved a sleek black wallet, and handed it to him. Inside, he found a badge and identification card bearing her name, rank, and photograph. "Agent Alexis Turner," he murmured under his breath, but his doubt lingered, clinging to him like the morning fog over Maplewood. This didn't fit his understanding of how the world worked, and he felt a surge of defiance against the idea that this woman, with her calm professionalism and unshakable demeanor, could be who she claimed to be. The tension was thick as he handed back her credentials, already bracing himself to dig deeper, to uncover whatever it was that had brought her here. The morning light filtered through the trees, casting a soft glow on the quiet streets of Maplewood as Officer Harris approached the sleek black sedan, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He rapped his knuckles against the window, the sound sharp and commanding. Inside, the figure stirred, a black woman, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, her hair drawn back into a neat bun. Alexis Turner lowered the window slowly, revealing calm, discerning eyes that met Harris's gaze with a composed, unwavering strength. "Good morning, officer," she greeted him, her voice steady and professional, as though unfazed by the scrutiny in his eyes. She'd been in this situation before too many times, really, but she had learned to hold her ground without betraying the frustration simmering beneath her calm facade. "Morning," Harris replied, his voice laced with a formality that belied his suspicion. "Mind telling me what brings you here? Folks don't usually sit parked like this without a reason." Alexis offered a slight, polite smile. "I'm conducting some work, officer. I'm with the government," she said, keeping her tone even, revealing just enough to convey her purpose without giving anything away. He tilted his head, his gaze hardening as he took in her polished appearance, the unmarked car, the quiet authority in her voice. "Government work, he repeated, his tone a shade colder. "Mind being a bit more specific?" Alexis replied matter-of-factly, her gaze never wavering. The response was calm, nonchalant, as though she had dealt with this exact conversation 100 times over. She watched as his expression shifted, a flicker of disbelief flaring in his eyes. "CIA," he echoed, as if tasting the word for the first time. His eyes scanned her face, searching for some crack in her demeanor, some sign that she was bluffing. "Well, that's a new one," he said with a slight sneer. "And I suppose you expect me to just believe that?" Alexis met his skepticism with silence, maintaining her calm. She knew her presence, her identity, and even her confidence would provoke distrust. This was routine, infuriatingly so. Harris's eyes narrowed, a hardened glint of doubt setting in as he squared his stance. "I'm going to need to see some ID, MS, government agent," he demanded, emphasizing the last words with a note of sarcasm. "Of course," Alexis replied, unfazed, and reached into the passenger seat for her bag, moving deliberately. She pulled out a sleek black wallet and handed it over, her badge displayed within. CIA credentials, embossed with her name, photograph, and identification number, sat next to her rank. Harris took the badge, his face a mask of skepticism as he inspected it, flipping it back and forth as if hoping to find some hidden tell, some flaw that would expose her as an imposter. "Looks pretty real," he admitted grudgingly, then added, "for a fake." Alexis took a slow breath, her frustration buried beneath a disciplined exterior. "It's real, officer," she said, her tone measured. "I am on duty." But Harris couldn't let it go. His distrust ran deeper, reaching past her words and credentials to something far more intrinsic, something he didn't even fully understand himself. She didn't belong here, he'd already decided that. "I don't buy it," he said finally, snapping the badge shut and thrusting it back to her. "Why don't you step out of the car, MS Turner? I'd like to take a closer look at what's inside." She hesitated, her gaze meeting his, the weight of countless similar confrontations bearing down on her. "Officer Harris," she began, her tone maintaining its polite edge, "there's no need for that. I've complied with every request, and as I mentioned, I'm on official government duty." "That's not up to you to decide," he shot back, his tone now sharp and laced with authority. His hand hovered close to his holster, a wordless signal to her. Taking a deep breath, Alexis unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car, her posture tall and dignified, betraying none of the frustration mounting beneath her calm exterior. Harris's gaze followed her, eyes searching for anything that would confirm his suspicions. She was just too composed, too unshaken, and that alone felt threatening to him. He moved toward the car door, his hand gripping the handle. Alexis stood nearby, her eyes following his movements, silently reminding herself to hold steady. She had learned long ago that calm and patience were sometimes her only defenses. Officer Bill Harris lingered over Alexis's sleek, black sedan, circling it like a predator assessing prey. His eyes were sharp, almost cold, betraying not curiosity but a simmering conviction, as if he were certain the vehicle would reveal some hidden truth he was eager to unearth. He leaned into the car, pulling open the glove compartment, flipping through papers with a determination that felt almost personal. the silence between them thickened, an unspoken acknowledgement of the unbalanced power dynamic at play. As he moved on to her bag, he shot Alexis a glance, a flicker of barely veiled suspicion clouding his expression. "Mind explaining why you're driving an unmarked vehicle, Ms. Turner?" His voice was tight, each word laced with an edge that suggested he needed no explanation. Alexis maintained her composure, the control in her voice unwavering. "I've shown you my credentials, officer. I am on official business." Harris chuckled, a sound that felt more accusatory than amused. "Official business, huh? With a car like this, in a town like Maplewood?" His hand rested on her black leather satchel, fingers brushing over the zipper. "Might you be hiding something dangerous in here? I've seen all kinds, you know." Her gaze didn't falter, though there was a glint in her eyes, one that spoke volumes of weariness, a lifetime of encounters like this, where her calm professionalism was met with unspoken judgments. "I am not hiding anything. You have no probable cause, officer," she replied, her words even but steady, attempting to cut through the bias thickening the air. He ignored her, opening the satchel, rifling through it with a certain possessiveness, as though anything inside would confirm his unspoken assumptions. But there was nothing but standard CI-issued tools and personal items, as orderly as she had kept her life under the weight of countless such encounters. He closed the bag, disappointment evident in his posture, yet his skepticism remained undiminished. Alexis's heart beat steadily. She knew this wasn't about the car or the bag. The thoroughness of his search wasn't about her credentials but something deeply rooted in a bias she had long been aware of. She stayed silent, choosing dignity over defiance, as experience had taught her to do. The failure of his search left Harris visibly frustrated. Without warning, he straightened, tightening his expression as he moved towards Alexis. "Step back," he barked, his tone no longer holding even the thin veneer of politeness. "You're under arrest." "For what, officer?" she asked, the question laced with genuine confusion yet delivered in the same calm, respectful tone she had used since the beginning. Harris paused, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face before he replied, "Suspicious activity. We need to verify your identity." His tone was sharp, meant to cut off further questions. He reached for her wrists, securing the cuffs with a click that resonated in the still morning air, a sound of finality and assertion. She watched his face, seeing the determination in his eyes, the need to prove her guilt, even without evidence. As he guided her to the patrol car, the world around them seemed to narrow, the silence amplifying the unspoken words and judgments hanging heavily in the air. Alexis's mind drifted momentarily to past encounters, other days, other towns where her identity was questioned, where her credibility was scrutinized, where she was forced to bear the brunt of someone else's insecurities and fears. During the drive, Harris sat stiffly in the front, his eyes focused on the road, though his jaw clenched, a mix of irritation and pride in his self-perceived vigilance. The car seemed filled with unspoken tension, an unbalanced weight that Alexis carried with the silent resilience of someone too accustomed to these experiences. She remained still, gazing out the window, her thoughts miles away, focusing on her mission, her duty, a quiet testament to her strength and professionalism that held her head high, even in the back of a police car. In that silence, she reclaimed her dignity, choosing strength over resistance, a reminder of the resilience she carried within herself, no matter the prejudice she faced. The station was filled with the quiet hum of activity, but Officer Bill Harris's focus was singular as he sat at his desk, typing up a report he believed would justify his actions. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting an artificial glare on the screen where his fingers moved with practiced precision. Just then, the phone on his desk rang, jolting him from his concentration. His supervisor's voice, low and tense, crackled through the receiver. "Bill, we've got a call straight from Washington. It's about your detainee, Alexis Turner. She's exactly who she says she is, a CIA operative on a critical mission," Chief Sanders said, each word a hammer striking the weight of the truth. There was a pause on the line, and Harris could practically hear the disappointment in his superior's voice. Harris's fingers froze mid-sentence, and a wave of cold swept through him. He felt the walls close in as the words sank in fully. He had detained a federal agent, one with credentials and a mission, solely based on his own prejudice. His mind raced to justify his suspicions, But they only felt thinner and more flimsy with each passing second. His face turned pale, the certainty in his actions now stripped away, leaving him exposed. A once unshakable authority now crumbled under the weight of his realization a bias had overshadowed his duty. Moments later, Harris stood in front of the holding area, keys in hand, the faint sound of metal scraping against metal echoing through the room as he unlocked the cell. Alexis stood up, her posture straight, her expression steady, an unbreakable presence despite all she had endured in the last hour. She stepped out of the cell without looking back, her silence a profound rebuke in itself. Harris, feeling the pull of guilt and shame, opened his mouth to say something, anything to bridge the chasm he'd created, but Alexis didn't wait for his words. As she passed him, she paused for just a moment, her dark eyes meeting his. They held no anger, no accusation, but a silent strength and disappointment that cut deeper than words. The look she gave him was filled with a powerful resilience, a quiet but undeniable statement of the injustice she had endured, and the weight of it crushed Harris in an instant. Without uttering a single word, Alexis walked out, leaving him to face the full consequences of his actions. It was as if the silence she left behind was the loudest indictment of all, echoing through the station and into Harris's conscience, a stark reminder of the biases he'd let take over. Once outside, Alexis paused, breathing in the crisp air, letting the reality of freedom ground her once more. She closed her eyes, drawing in the coolness, steadying herself after what she had endured. This wasn't her first encounter with such prejudice, but it was a jarring reminder that no level of professionalism or status shielded her entirely from it. This was the burden she bore, the unseen cost of being who she was in places that were not yet ready to see her as she saw herself. Yet, as her feet took her back toward her mission, her resolve grew stronger. The incident only sharpened her determination, underscoring the importance of her role and the quiet power she held. She carried with her a sense of purpose deeper than any hostility could challenge, determined to fulfill her duties with honor. She knew that her presence, her success, disrupted deeply held biases, and that was a power in itself. As she walked forward, Alexis let her resilience and dignity become her shield, her answer to prejudice a simple but profound one: she would not be silenced.